All right, did it just say that it's recording? Okay, all right. Good evening, everybody. Thank you all for coming. We're short 2 Osterburs. They home eating dinner?
Resting up. We had basketballs on Tuesday nights these for the rest of the coinciding this fall, so we have late practice on Tuesday.
I understand needing to rest. Well, he's not quite as big, so. All righty. Well, Noah said he has an announcement, and he's not going to tell me what it is, so I'm a little nervous, but go ahead.
I have a list of what Dad did wrong. So could you write down what you have and I'll add it to the list?
Keeping a running list. Thank you. That's so kind of you. So he did have a list for the car ride home last week too, I tell you what.
Are we gonna get to see this list when you're done with it?
All right, well, let's say a prayer and then we will get started with our study this evening. All right, Lord, we thank you for this day. We thank you again for this time that we can be together with friends and family. And we ask that you would bless our reading of the scriptures and our study of your word so that our spirits can be enlightened. And we ask that the Holy Spirit would work through the reading of his word this evening. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
All right, anybody have any questions that popped up after last week? Any comments or anything you want to jump in with before we start?
I have a question on this.
Oh, my horrible typo.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So in the congregation at prayer, it says something like, we should fear and love God, so we tell lies about our neighbor. Hopefully you all. Yeah, probably should throw don't in there. Yes. We do not. We do not wish to tell lies about them. At least it was an easily catchable typo.
Just checking to see if you're
Right. Is that it?
if you're paying attention when you're
Yep.
reading.
Yes, you passed the test. So A plus. It's not. Well, and Claire Ann emailed me and she had the whole thing highlighted. She'd copied and pasted and highlighted in like 18-point font. She's like, I don't think this is correct. Yes, that is definitely not correct. All right, so we are going to begin with the 8th commandment, which should be page 57 in your curriculum books.
Not the 7th commandment.
What's that? We did the 7th last time.
7th last week.
We
Noah, you gotta have a different sheet now. Noah's errors.
Yeah, that's right. I should. He said I need another sheet to have your errors written down, since you're keeping a list for me. All right, so 57. We'll just read it right out of the book here, and we'll start out with you all repeating it back, same as usual. All right, what is the 8th commandment?
You shall not have false testimony against your neighbor.
And what does this mean?
We should fear and love God, so that we do not tell lies about our neighbor, betray him, slander him, or hurt his reputation, but defend him, speak well of him, and explain everything in the kindest way.
All right, so we'll go over just a couple of the catechism terms first. False testimony or false witness. That is specifically talking about, and as we'll get to it in a moment, it's talking about court, right? Because that's the simplest reading of this commandment. And she can handle him. That is the simplest reading of this commandment, and that's where it will start. Gossip, and I made a couple of notes here. So gossip is rumor or talk of a personal, sensational, or intimate nature. Noah, would you go silence the kids, please? Get me the paper towel. Yeah. Slander is specifically meant to hurt the reputation. So, and actually we're going to get to a little bit more slander here in a few minutes, but that's the basic difference. Gossip's the juicy stuff, right? So-and-so's car was at the strip club, right? That's gossip, talking about somebody. A key to a lot of this is going to be secret knowledge, right? We will make a distinction between, yes, ma'am.
We were always told it's not gossip unless you repeat it to somebody else.
So, yeah. I think that's true, as long as the gossip ends with you, right? Listening in can be somewhat enjoyable. And then we have slander, which is specifically just to hurt someone else's reputation, right? I suppose that same illustration could be used, right? If you're at church and you say, oh, so-and-so's car was at the strip club, well, there's no reason to say that other than to make others think lesser of them. But we'll actually talk about slander more here in a moment. Something that's not on here that we should talk about is jurisdiction. What is jurisdiction? It's a legal term. Does anybody have a thought? Nick? Yeah, what's jurisdiction?
Control over a certain area.
Yeah, exactly. So if Southern Pines Police has jurisdiction over Southern Pines, they have control over this area. They do not have jurisdiction over Robbins, right? So they are not able to perform their same duties out there because they don't have jurisdiction. Another perspective on jurisdiction is another legal term called standing. And so we talk about you have to have standing to object, right? I can't sue Ford because there was a big recall. I don't know if you heard, some of Ford's cars were catching fire, the new ones. I can't sue Ford for a truck catching fire when I don't have one of those trucks. I don't have standing to do that. So jurisdiction and standing, same sort of idea. You have, for whatever reason, a right to be involved in this area. Okay, so those are just some terms that we're going to be talking about here. Blow my page off here, I got a little spill. Mr. Cocker, would you please read the top paragraph under excerpts for the large catechism on the 8th commandment on page 57.
Over and above our own body, spouse, and personal possessions, we still have another treasure, honor and good reputation. We cannot do without these, for it is intolerable to live among people in open shame and jealousy. Therefore, God does not want the reputation, good name, and upright character of our neighbor to be taken away or diminished, just as his money and possessions. He wants everyone to stand in his integrity before wife, children, servants, and neighbors. The plainest meaning of this commandment applies to the public courts of justice, where a poor innocent man is accused and oppressed by false witness in order to be punished in his body, property, or honor.
Thank you.
Was that first?
That was the top, it's from the large catechism. It was the top paragraph there. That's why of all these books I have open, I was just telling someone on Zoom, those kind of bizarre references, the 388 is a page number from a different version from what I'm using. And I don't know why they cited it this way. They're trying to be helpful, but 255 to 257 are paragraph markers. As we do more with the Book of Concord, with our confessional documents, I will teach you all how to find them, how we reference them, because it's different from the Bible. But that's for another night. That's what those are supposed to be, is catechism references. So this all starts with court. It is the easiest place to talk about telling the truth, right? Because if you are on the stand, someone else, hopefully, is on trial, right? And you are giving witness to what you saw. Either, yes, I did see this. No, I did not see this. I saw something else entirely. But you are required to tell the truth. What happens when you don't tell the truth? You perjure yourself, yes, if you contradict your own testimony, but you hurt your neighbor, right? You hurt the person who is on trial. You do hurt your own reputation by saying something that is untrue. Same thing happens if we say nothing, right? So if someone is on trial and you know that they didn't do what they are accused of doing, and you say nothing, well, it's the same thing, right? Because it's kind of that sin of withholding the truth. So there are times when we absolutely have to say the truth. Now it's uncomfortable, and especially in our current justice system, you sometimes get put through the ringer as a witness, but it's what God requires of us. The truth is worth it. In the same way that if you were the one on trial, you would hope that others would come up and tell the truth on your behalf, right? So we're doing everything in light of how we would want others to be doing it for us. All right, I'm going to read some that you don't have in your book here. To be a judge requires above all things a godly man, and not only a godly man, but also a wise, modest, indeed a brave and bold man. Likewise, to be a witness requires a fearless and especially godly man. For a person who is to judge all matters rightly and carry them through with his decision will offend good friends, relatives, neighbors, and the rich and powerful, who may greatly serve or injure him. Therefore, he must be quite blind, have his eyes and ears closed, neither see nor hear, but go straight forward in everything that comes before him and decide accordingly. Does anybody want to testify against a golf course around here? What's going to happen, right? People that you don't know exist are going to make life very difficult on you, right? Because this is a golfing community and golf brings in a lot of money. And there are very powerful people who can use the law to get what they want. We'll touch a little bit more on that as we go. But the point here is, right, I don't need that headache, right? It would be easier for me to just go with the flow. And I have nothing against the golf courses. They're probably good people, but point is, don't go against them, right? So we have to be blind in the sense of, you see at the courthouses, Lady Justice has the blindfold and the balance, right? Because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're going up against the golf course or if you're going to go up against somebody down the street that's got 20 bucks to his name, right? Truth is truth. And our neighbor is our neighbor. All right, I'm going to continue. Let's see, is 216 here? No. Paragraph 260 from the Large Catechism here. Therefore, this commandment is given in the first place so that everyone shall help his neighbor to secure his rights and not allow them to be hindered or twisted. But everyone shall promote and strictly maintain these rights, no matter whether he is a judge or a witness, and let it apply to whatsoever it will. A particular goal is set up here for our jurists that they be careful to deal truly and uprightly with every case, allowing right to remain right. On the other hand, they must not pervert anything by their tricks and technical points, turning black into white and making wrong out to be right. Can anyone think of anything in the news lately where wrong has been made right and right has been made wrong or otherwise unclear, specifically with court cases, since that's what Luther's talking about in this part? Pretty much all you hear? Yeah. Well, and that is true. Here's a specific example for you. Out in California, they have a lot of laws, one of which is protecting wild fish. Right? Has anybody heard about this? Oh man, I must get my news from really weird places. So they have these laws in the books, environmental, to protect fish. Well, there's gridlock in whatever laws there are. Somebody's paying somebody and not getting what they want. Lots of frustration. Cutting to the chase, the bees aren't getting protected, right? So the federal court in California has decided that bees are now fish and are therefore protected under the same environmental act. Because bees are fish, right? Is a bee a fish? No, a bee is not a fish, right? It's ridiculous on its face. But if you can convince the magistrate, the judge, the whoever it is, that, you know, for the greater good, we're all going to agree that a bee is a fish, well, then now we're operating under the law, right? Hey, well, strictly speaking, it is under the law. It's wrong. It's done through trickery.
Came to the conclusion that a bee was a fish, or a fish was a bee, has got to be a little on the Looney Tune side anyway.
Well, I would completely agree.
Put this in.
So that's where it goes back to jurists and judges and all of us should be blind, right? Somebody had an agenda there, right? And we don't need to delve into that agenda because it's neither here nor there. But clearly, these people were willing to turn right into wrong and black into white and say a bee is a fish in order to get accomplished what they wanted, right? That's
Twisting the law.
yeah, it is. It absolutely is twisting the law. So we see this ridiculous example to show us kind of the precedent, that sort of thing that we're talking about. But there's other ways that we can do this, right? Easements on your property. I just got my whole, well, not my whole front yard, but large swaths of my front yard were dug up with a ditch witch so they could run fiber. And it is all tore up. But joke's on them though. Or I shouldn't say joke's on them. I'm actually appreciative because I needed to swedge out that ditch. It was getting backed up and they did it for me. So it's actually, they saved me a few days work. So I'm thankful. But it got me thinking, we were supposed to have a fence put in there. And we didn't have a fence put in just because other things were prioritized, and that fence would have got torn down, right? If my neighbors didn't like that fence, they could have tore it down because it's within 10 feet of the road, and I hadn't thought anything about it, right? I hadn't thought about easements. Anybody in here have an HOA? Yeah. And we have thumbs down coming from the back. I would struggle very much to live with an HOA. If somebody tells me I need to put paperwork in to get my own satellite dish on my own roof, I would lose my cherub demeanor rather quickly because my house, right? Using, we'll say trickery, because I think it's fair here, in order to control others and get the outcome that we want. Doesn't matter if anybody has a satellite dish on their own house, especially now they're just like a stick, right? But these people back before you bought the house snuck that in there, right? There's certain things that are good about an HOA, right? And if you live on a golf course, there's a lot of positive that comes along with that. A lot of maintenance is done, a lot of beauty that's done, but the satellite dish thing is not really supposed to be part of it, right? So trickery, deceit, turning black into white, that's the sort of thing that also we talk about in the 8th commandment here. All right, let's see here. All right, so we are ready for paragraph 263. Mr. Furman, would you read the next paragraph? Begins with this commandment forbids.
This commandment forbids all sins of the tongue by which we may injure or confront our neighbor. To bear false witness is nothing else than a work of the tongue. Now, God prohibits whatever is done with the tongue against the fellow man. This applies to false preachers with their doctrine and blasphemy, false judges and witnesses with their verdict, or outside of court by lying and speaking evil.
So it's starting to expand, right? We're expanding outside of court. We've moved from the easy examples to the ones that get a little bit harder. I'm going to pick up with paragraph 264. Here belongs particularly the detestable, shameful vice of speaking behind a person's back and slandering, to which the devil spurs us on, and of which much could be said. For it is a common evil plague that everyone prefers hearing evil more than hearing good about his neighbor. We ourselves are so bad that we cannot allow anyone to say anything bad about us. Everyone would much prefer that all the world should speak of him in glowing terms. Yet we cannot bear that the best is spoken about others. Right? That's going to get us more towards our coveting here in the next commandments, but I see a lot of people nodding, especially with siblings, right? Because it's in little kids, because it's so easy to see with little kids. They get jealous just at the drop of a hat, right? And you say, does it take anything away from you that your brother is being praised for doing a good job cutting the grass? Well, no, is it a good thing because he's your family? Because that reflects well on you too, right? Well, yes. Is it a good thing because the grass is mowed and now you can play and hopefully we don't get ticks? Well, yes, right? So why are we upset that Noah's getting praised for doing a good job? Right? It's hard. It's hard for us to hear others to be put on a pedestal, right? And others spoken good, because it's just our sinful nature fighting against that. It's like, well, I'm a pretty good guy too, right? Like Chaplain Nelson, I mean, he does a good job, but like you guys, right? You like it better when I preach, right? So and of course, I very much enjoy Chaplain Nelson, and I thank you all for laughing and not taking that seriously. Because, what does it take away from me if Chaplain Nelson does a fantastic job, right? We all benefit, myself included. The church benefits. We're all better off for it. So I should be leading the charge of saying how good of a job Chaplain Nelson does. Now, I hope you all have heard me say positive things about our visiting chaplains because they do a great job of taking care of us, right? Takes nothing away from us to say that, but it still is there. It still is hard. And how easy is it when you hear somebody talking about somebody else at work who's doing such a fantastic job? And you're like, yeah, well, they turned it in late, but yeah, but it was good, right? You get one little dig in just to kind of level things back out a bit. All right. So I mentioned slander. And you mentioned it's not gossip if you don't say anything. So actually, I'm going to read starting in paragraph 266, which I think I'm skipping. Hold on. Okay, yeah. Mr. Osterberg, would you read "No one is allowed" starting on 58?
No one is allowed publicly to judge and reprove his neighbor, even though he may see him sin, unless he has command to judge and to reprove. There is a great difference between these two things, judging sin and knowing about sin. You may indeed know about it, but you are not to judge it. I can indeed see and hear that my neighbor sins, but I have no command to report it to others. Now, if I rush in, judging and passing sentence, I fall into a sin that is greater than his.
All right, I'm gonna just.
You're fine, I can finish. I just gotta get better light. My eyes are terrible. But if you know about it, do nothing other than turn your ears into a grave and cover until you are appointed to be judge and to punish by virtue of your office.
Hey, Aaron, why don't you just flip the light switch on there? I think your guys' got left off unintentionally. All right, so turn your ears into a grave. All right, well, what does that mean? What you hear stays there, right? We don't need to share it. But what's this about until you are appointed to be judge and to punish by virtue of your office? I'm actually going to read the next line that I think got left out of this book. I really like this curriculum. I do very much, but I read the large catechism too, and I'm like, oh, they should have put that in there. Should put that in. 267 says, people are called slanderers who are not content with knowing a thing, but go on to assume jurisdiction. Right? So, what does it mean to assume jurisdiction and become a slanderer when you are doing so? Mm-hmm. Tattletaling. That is exactly the word that I would use, is tattletaling, right? So tattletaling is where you come to me and you say, Benny did not finish wiping the table like you told him to, right? So that is, never happens. So that is assuming jurisdiction over something that you do not have jurisdiction over, right? Who is in charge of Benny?
Hopefully me.
Who's in charge of Benny? Me, right? Me and your mother. So it is not your place to be taking care of a problem that you are not involved in, right? So at the point that you assume jurisdiction and you try to exert control over something that you shouldn't, well, what are you doing? You're slandering, right? Because all you're doing is hurting someone else's reputation for no reason, because it's not your job. And even if it was your job, you don't have the ability to right this supposed wrong, right? So you've moved into just slander. Think of your neighbor. Yes.
Well, I have trouble with it's the sentence in here that says, but I have no command to report it to others.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is that what you've seen is the breakage of a law? I interpret this as saying, I can't tell anybody.
So this is the good part, the meat and potatoes of what we're going to talk about tonight. Turn down. So I pulled up on my phone here, North Carolina's mandatory reporter law. Oh, that's not it. I pulled it up and apparently I deleted it because this is something about a phone update that apparently just happened. So I'm not going to bother to look for it. In North Carolina, and I'll paraphrase here, but If you see or otherwise have knowledge that a minor is being physically abused, you are required to report that to the authorities, namely the police or child protective services, either in person, in writing, or over the phone, whereby you give all of your information. Because if it is found out that you did have knowledge of it and did nothing, you are liable as it's a level 1 or first class misdemeanor, right? I was thinking it was going to be like teachers, pastors, and there was going to be something defined, and it's not. It's like anybody, which is harsh, is very harsh. But going back to that one line, go ahead. It's North Carolina's mandatory reporter law. If it's something that you have a hard time finding, text me and I'll send you the link to it. So it's let's go back to this here. I'm getting ahead of myself. What did we say at the beginning about secret sins or things that people don't know about, right? So specifically at this particular point of discussing the 8th commandment, we're talking about things that no one else knows, right? So let's see if we can get a good example. My neighbor in the apartment next to me has cats, and it's a violation of the lease to have cats, right? It's not my job to go get them in trouble. It really doesn't concern me, right? In this example, no one's allergic to cats, and the cats are not keeping you awake or anything like that, right? Which may not be the case, but I'm just trying to give an example of a secret sin here, right? So it's not my job to be the landlord and go take care of it. That needs to be kept in private. Or you know of someone else who's struggling with really, I mean, it's any number of sins that someone is struggling with, something that you would be able to gossip about, that you would enjoy telling others, that we have no business telling because it's not common knowledge, right? So these things aren't our business. We get into crimes, specifically mandatory reporter, where the state has made it your business, right? So we all are apparently deputized under North Carolina law to go and make right a wrong. But let's draw a distinction here. Let's talk about who has jurisdiction over what. Aram, who do you have jurisdiction over? Who has jurisdiction over you, who was also sitting next to you? Your dad, right? So you have to do what your dad says because, well, he's your dad, right? He's in charge of you, and it is for your good that you do what he says, right? If you're not doing good in school, can I show up at your house and be like, you need to be studying, put away the video games? No, right? I don't have jurisdiction over you. You are not my son, right? If I had a problem, the best I could do, if anything, right? Probably I should do nothing, but the best I would do would be talk to your dad because he does have jurisdiction over you, right? And that is something that is important to recognize. Okay, here's another example. And this gets a little harder and a little harder for me especially. All right. Who has jurisdiction over you regarding spiritual matters? Yeah, the pastor does, right? I'm the best that most of you have right now. And I don't want to turn the screws and be like, I'm your boss, right? Because that's not what we're getting at here, right? But I have jurisdiction over you in the sense of, like we talked on Sunday, someday I have to give an account for all of your souls because while you were in my care, I have to take care of you, right? So if I see someone of you struggling with some sort of sin, whatever it may be, it's my job to talk to you about it and to be honest about it, right? If you see someone struggling with sin, and for this first example, that's not your friend, right? Not somebody that you have a good relationship with, You either do nothing or you talk to the person who does have jurisdiction over them and then leave it. Then your ears go back to being a tomb, right? Because we have mechanisms in place. God has given us different people and different places to take care of us, right? If you witness a crime, all right, somebody busts out a window in the parking lot and you see who it is, who has jurisdiction over that? The police, right? Now, one of us will probably go, probably Nick, probably run out there and try and tackle him because he's young and, you know, we'll cheer him on from a distance. But it's the police's job, right? It does no benefit to any of us to tell one another and hope something gets done because we don't have jurisdiction, right? That's not our business. And we would be slandering some unknown individual out there. And I can say from personal experience, when a lot of people think they see something and mean well, and things go downhill quickly, and that's how you get innocent people in trouble. So here's where it gets difficult, all right? This mandatory reporter law, right? What's abuse? I don't know, right? I spanked all of my kids. Some people would say that's abuse, right? A lot of us in here would say that taking the kid to a crazy doctor and getting puberty blockers when they're 5 is abuse. Do I have to report that? Right? That this kid is never going to get calcium in their bones and they're going to be disabled by the time they're 20, right? Boy, I don't know. That's difficult, right? That's the sort of thing that we have to struggle with. For those of you with younger siblings, so Noah and Nick both have little siblings, right? And I put Noah on the spot. So Noah does not have jurisdiction over Benny. Noah kind of has jurisdiction over Benny, a little bit, right? Kind of as my representative. When I'm not around, he's old enough, I'm like, hey, you're in charge while I'm gone, right? So he kind of has jurisdiction over that. In the same way that you kind of, in a little way, have jurisdiction over the little kids next door if you see that they have a broken arm from the dad jerking them out of the car, right? It's very limited. It's very difficult. It's not easy, but sometimes we get put into those situations. So the best advice that we can give is, well, who definitely has jurisdiction over this, right? So if Noah doesn't know what to do with Benny because he's not sure if it's in his jurisdiction or not, who do you go get? Yeah, me, right? Or mom. If you're not sure if this kid is abused or not, and this is a tricky one because I'll be the first to tell you, CPS is normally it's like a 19-year-old kid studying sociology that shows up and you're like, oh no, what are you gonna say? But we know that the police have ultimate jurisdiction, right? So we go to the authority that God has put in place and we are honest and we are blind about our honesty when we have to be. So when the police officer says, what did you see? If you saw somebody get wrenched and that little arm snap, then you tell them that. If you did not see that, you do not tell them that. And then where this gets also harder, but also more clear, is when the police leave and all the neighbors come out to the mailbox, your ears go back to being a vault. What did you see? It was a bad day. The police are handling it. Just call them because, you know, justice will get done through them, but it's not my business to be slandering my neighbor, right? Because at that point, we can't help them. We're doing nothing positive for them. We have no control over the situation any longer. So by speaking evil of what they have done that others didn't know, then we have moved into the category of slander, right? Tough. That's where it gets tough. It is. And so that's where we as much as we can, we speak well of people or we speak nothing about them, right? Can't say nothing nice, don't say nothing at all. Was that Bambi? Is that where that's from? Something, one of those Disney movies. And again, we kick it to the person that has authority, whoever that may be. That's going to be your best bet to do right by everyone. All right, let me move on here.
You know, David, there was a good analogy when my youngest was in first grade. His bus driver was a very dear friend of ours. And he apparently got this little bad nose from the teacher, surprising him, talking. But when he gets off the bus, he put it in the flower bed. So Mama wouldn't see it.
Mm.
So Marilyn called me and she says, please don't say nothing to Cody, but I think there's something you need to see in the flower bed. I'm gonna leave it at that. She said, well, please don't tell Cody I called. I'm like, okay, thank you for letting me know. So I waited a little bit. I said, Cody, let's go clean up in the yard. Okay, Mama, let's go. And Louis started weeding us. Let's go weed out the flower beds. Okay, Mama, let's go. Let's start weeding this one, Mama. I'm like, well, why? Let's just don't. And before I could get there, he starts crying. Mom, I got a note and I hit it. I said, well, what did the note say? He said, I talked too much. I said, then what did you say? I'm my mama's child. But the funny part is what really turned it into so much fun for me. I miss those days. It's when they had parent-teacher conferences. I would sit there, okay, y'all know about the bad note. Is there anything that I'm going to be told tonight when I get to that class? Because if there's anything that y'all have not told me that they tell, oh man, it's going to be on when we get home.
Mm-hmm.
They confess to not drinking all the milk, to talking too much for 15th time, everything. And on the way to school, they're still sitting there giving themselves a headache trying to. When they get there, the teacher says nothing concerning it. In case, well, why did we admit it? I said, because it was the right thing.
That's right.
It was just the right thing.
That's right.
But it was so funny. She was in that position. Well, I don't know exactly, but just go look.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes those things goes. My grandma used to tell me, give them just a little bit of road.
Oh yeah.
You don't have to say a whole lot. But whoever, whether it's an adult or anything else, they'll have their sale.
Mm-hmm. And how nice of that lady to call you, because you have jurisdiction over your kids, and to just leave it at that.
Well, my oldest one, he asked me when they right in the middle of church, because all of their teachers went to our church, because it was just a little community place. Mama, can I move to another school? Well, no, we cannot move to another school. It's fine. Because you know every teacher in here, you know everything. I said, do you think if we moved to 3 states over, I still wouldn't?
Yeah. Well, and my mom's dad was the school principal, and when she would get in trouble as a kid, she'd get paddled at school, because this was way back. And then when she'd get home, he'd paddle her again, and he'd say, "I paddled you as the principal this time. Now I'm paddling you as your dad." And so you get double paddles. So why is it so important that after we kick the ball to the right person, we say nothing? Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you say nothing, it's just over. Nick? Yeah, as to not instigate. That's a big one, right? And I used to have this conversation with people all the time when I'd show up. I'd say, listen, you're wanting me to arrest your neighbor so bad. I said, they're going to be back tomorrow because they live here. I don't live here. Like, you guys are going to be neighbors until one of you moves in 5 years. Like, do you really want them arrested, or do you want to work this out like friends? Because they're going to come back tomorrow after having spent the night in jail, and it's going to be a lot more difficult, right? Another thing, and here's a family example. My sister's family, when they were little kids, got into a car accident, and one of the little girls had potentially a fracture, a bruise, a something on her sternum. And the well-meaning nurse calls CPS, right? So of course, once CPS gets a foot in the door, they have to investigate and everything. And it's, well, I don't want to go down that road. What we all know to be true, what everyone knows and no one disputes, is that they were just in a car accident, right? Her little buckle was right over this little bruise. It's very clear what happened, right? But what if that lady had been like, oh, hey, because my sister and my mom both work at the hospital. I used to work at the hospital. My wife used to work at the hospital. They're like, hey, Dave's brother-in-law got CPS called on him, right? That news is going to travel like wildfire. The wait a second, it was a car accident, you doofus, is going to travel much slower, right? His reputation very much damaged. had that occurred, right? So just because we tell the truth doesn't mean that we have the whole story, right? So I can tell absolutely, completely correct what I saw, 100% truth, only to learn that from the other camera angle, there was something else that proved that what I said was true, the situation was not what I perceived, right? And that it's a good thing I didn't have jurisdiction over this because I would have judged wrongly, right? So it's double important that we keep our mouth shut after we have kicked the ball to the right person. Yep. Okay. So for matters, I'm just going to put one sentence here from 275. For in matters of justice, necessity requires one to speak of the evil, to prefer charges, to investigate, and to testify. So that's kind of a good summary there, right? In matters of justice. So someone has been injured, and in order to make that right, you have to tell the truth. Someone has been wronged, you have to make it right. Someone puts up a satellite dish, you don't have to go to the HOA, right? Can we see the difference there? It's not a matter of justice. It's not a matter of someone's good name. We should never deprive it. So now we're moving from the secret stuff to the public stuff. We should never deprive anyone of his honor or good name unless it is first taken away from him publicly. So paragraph 271, false witness then is everything that cannot be publicly proved. Can it be proven beyond a reasonable doubt? Right? And we joke around with your friends, right? It's not what you know to be true and what I know to be true. It's what you can prove beyond a reasonable doubt in the court of law, right? I tell my wife that semi-regular, and I'm like, ma'am, if you don't have any proof of this allegation, these heinous crimes that I'm supposedly committing, I'll move to dismiss all charges and we go back to dinner, stuff like that. But it's actually kind of true, right? Not that my wife was being heinous, but that if we can't prove something, we really have no business saying it, right? Maybe we call it being the bigger person and moving on. Maybe we call it to run our mouth as slander, and so we don't want to do that. Either way you look at it, it's better to not speak unless it can be proven publicly. And if it can't be proven publicly, that pretty much automatically is going to move it into that false witness slander category. I'm going to read what's the next paragraph from our book that you all have? Is it 269? What was that? Oh, I skipped over that, didn't I? Oh, let's do 80. Yeah, we'll do 284. Who's up for reading? Who would like to read? Mr. Osterber Jr. The last paragraph on page 58, beginning with all this has been said.
All this has been said about secret sin. But where's the sin? But where the sin is by public, so that the judge and everything about them is. And without any sin, shun the offender and let him go his own way, because he has brought himself to disgrace. They also publicly testify for him. For when a matter is public in the daylight, there can be no slandering or false judging or testifying. It is like when we are now review and spoke with a
Melissa, Aram is reading and he's doing a great job.
that it is publicly set forth in books, proclaimed in all works. The sin is public and reviewed also must be public, that everyone may learn to guard against it.
Very good. So I heard an analogy from Hans Feeney. He does the Lutheran Satire website. It is not, yeah. Miss Melms is laughing because she knows Hans Feeney. It's not to everyone's taste in humor, but he is a very funny, very quick-witted Lutheran pastor. And he is oftentimes criticized for publicly going after people. And what he described that I think is is accurate. Is he said, at the point that you put something out on the news or on your YouTube channel or in a book, it's like a fighter entering an arena, right? So if me and Nick are messing around, right? I can't go over and pummel him until he's almost unconscious, right? That's bad. We all agree that that's bad. But if Nick and I are like, hey, let's go to the gym, let's put on gloves and let's tussle, right? Well, that's fine, right? That's expected. And frankly, if you go through all the trouble to put yourself in the ring and then somebody else is just taking your punches like, oh, well, I don't want to be mean. Oh, well, I don't want to hurt your feelings. Right? You would look at that and you would say, well, that's not the point, right? Get up there and fight. Be a man. Don't be a wussy, right? So publicly, it is appropriate to respond publicly, okay? So the difference is an individual's having an affair and you know about it. You don't tell everybody, right? You talk about it with the pastor, you work through it, you go to counseling, you do whatever, but that matter is no one else's concern. That person brings their girlfriend to church and expects everyone to say nothing. Right? That is public. And at the point that it is public, it does not damage anyone's reputation to speak the truth publicly, right? If you say, hey, person sitting next to me, that's not your wife. You need to take your hand off of her thigh and probably leave this church because that ain't what we're about, right? And think about it like this. Here's the other side of this. Suppose, hypothetically, somebody comes with, in that scenario, right? They have someone who, in a small church like this, we all know who we're married to. Somebody comes with someone that's not their spouse, right? Nobody says anything. And I get up and preach, and I say nothing. We all move on with our day. What does he think? All right, Dad didn't say anything. Kids, it's not like kids aren't going to notice. Kids pick this stuff up. So the lesson that we all taught is that, well, it's not, we don't want to make anyone uncomfortable. We don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, right? On the contrary, someone is doing something egregious. Someone is doing something public. Stop it. You are damaging yourself. You are damaging this other person. You are damaging all of us, and we are not going to tolerate it, right? It's like the difference, you know, that old Cesar Millan show, and the dog parents would be like, come on, Fifi, you know, and Fifi just does whatever Fifi wants. And then Cesar Millan goes up and I don't know whatever it is he does, but it changes their channel, right? Because when it is responded to definitively and firmly and with conviction, it's different. It hits different, right? Because, hey, my wife and I we're going through a hard time, and I didn't think anything of it, right? I thought that you all would just be happy for me, but I show up and nobody's happy for me. Everybody is calling out my sin publicly. Maybe I should take this seriously. Maybe I should nip this in the bud, right? I'm certainly going to be embarrassed and I'm going to be shamed appropriately, right? For the sake of others who are learning, also for the sake of that person, right? What happens when you turn your back on God? What happens when you embrace sin? Any number of the 10 commandments, right? Doesn't matter which one, take your pick. If you say this is no longer sin to me and I don't have to obey it and God doesn't have to forgive me, what happens? Yeah, you start a slow skid down. God is not mocked. Absolutely. There are consequences for this. Sometimes only in the life to come, sometimes in both of them, right? But we believe that heaven and hell are real, right? Like they're real places. And withholding the truth for someone else's benefit is not compassionate. And that's something that, Penn and Teller, the tall guy, is that Penn?
Yeah.
He's a pretty famous outspoken atheist But he said at one point, he said, but if you do believe that I'm going to die and go to hell, right? That I'm going to spend eternity in some lake of fire, and you don't say anything, that is so inconsistent with your beliefs. Like, why would you wish that on me? What have I done to you that you want me to go to a lake of fire? You know, like if he's like, I don't believe that, but if that's what you believe, then you should say something to me about it. And he has a point, right? He has a point. So publicly is different. And again, not to put too fine of a point on it, but if you do something privately and no one knows, by definition, no one knows, right? So your reputation is not going to be harmed. If you do something publicly, by definition, everyone knows, right? It is public. And so no one else is going to damage your reputation by saying what it is you are doing, right? All right. Goodness, is that real? Is it really 7 o'clock?
Yeah.
Who's been talking so much? My Amazing Grace clock is going off for those of you who can't hear. Well, I got to speed up just a little bit here. Let's see here. All right, so let me just read this summary from the 8th commandment. It is, do you have paragraph 285 as the last one?
No.
284, of course. Of course. I need to write my own curriculum for this thing. 285. Now we have the sum and general understanding of this commandment. Let no one do any harm to his neighbor with the tongue, whether friend or foe. Do not speak evil of him, no matter whether it is true or false, unless it is done by commandment or for his reformation. Let everyone use his tongue and make it serve for the best of everyone else, to cover up his neighbor's sins and infirmities, excuse them, conceal and garnish them with his own reputation. The chief reason for this should be the one that Christ declares in the gospel, where he includes all commandments about our neighbor. Whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them. It references 1 Peter 4:8. And so just to make sure that we're clear, when it says to cover up other sins, it doesn't mean to allow them to sin. It means to allow them privacy while you help them through it, right? To not make public and to not slander them while you're still doing the right thing, for the context there. Yeah, that went really well. I did not think it was going to take that long, but I'm glad. We have about 15 minutes. Rather than get too far into the 9th and 10th commandments, we are going to talk about the main concept of it. And then next week, we'll kind of dive into it. Covet is a weird word. Do we agree that covet is a weird word? You're shrugging. You're shrugging because you agree, or you're shrugging because you don't really know what it is?
Questionable.
Okay, so Aram says questionable. And I agree with that. It's a hard word because, you know, if you define it as wanting something your neighbor has, right? Well, I've talked ad nauseum how I want Adam's truck, right? But I don't want to take it from him. I want to get my own 2014 Silverado 5.3 extended cab or quad cab, 4-wheel drive with the 5.3 in the back. But you know, I want to get mine back. Yeah. So am I breaking these commandments now, or do I just want a cool truck, right? Like, so that it gets hard, it gets hinky all of a sudden to try and understand why we have these 2 commandments on coveting. And particularly, if you look, is that sun in your eyes? Do we need to close? Okay. Would you mind closing the blinds right behind you? Is it that one or is it this one here? Noah, would you get this one too? All right, is that better? Okay. And holler at them if you need them to get those blinds too, of course. Where was I going? Oh, especially in modern America, you can't watch a show on YouTube. You can't drive down the road and not see an advertisement, right? And these advertisements are particularly wanting you to be dissatisfied with where you're at, right? Maybe she's beautiful, or maybe it's Maybelline, I don't know, whatever it is. I think I said that wrong, right? You're not as pretty as you would be if you buy our product. You're not as attractive to girls as you would be if you bought our cars. You're not as whatever, right? And it's trying to make you uncontent, discontent, so that you go buy something. And then we're told, especially nowadays, please go buy things. Please help the economy, right? Do your part. We gave you a stimulus so that you could go spend it, right? And so it gets really hard. So coveting, before we even talk about the 9th and 10th commandments, a little bit of language stuff for you. The same word that is translated covet is translated in German as, does anybody have a guess? Lust. Lust. Now we tend to think of lust as for the opposite sex, right? We think of it in that reproductive sort of nature. However, right? Anybody else ever gotten fixated on something like a truck, and all of a sudden it's 2 o'clock in the morning, and you're like, I just got to figure out how to get that truck, right? Or like lately, I'm grilling like crazy, and I'm watching just like video after video of people cooking briskets, and I'm like, I'm gonna get that brisket, right? But it's visceral, right? It is visceral. Like, I want that brisket, and it's not even because I'm hungry, right? I'm serious, but you all know what I mean, right? And it's weird to say it as lust because we think of lust as one thing, but it's lust, right? Let me give you another example that maybe makes a little bit more sense there. If you have ever known someone who went through Alcoholics Anonymous, when did they cease being an alcoholic?
Never.
Never, right? I am an alcoholic who's been sober for X number of weeks, days, months. Here's my chip, call my sponsor, right? They take that very seriously. You were always an alcoholic. Keeping that in mind, the Latin for this same word that we translate here as coveting is, see if I can get it right, concupiscentia or concupiscence. Does that mean anything to anyone? Concubine? Okay. What's that? Yoked together. Okay. So concupiscence is something that when I was at Fort Wayne last, however many years ago, doing the seminary thing, we spent like an entire afternoon debating this concept of concupiscence. All right. This is something that we differ with the Roman Catholic Church on. Your Catholic friends may not even know this, but if they did, we would differ. Okay. Concupiscence is original sin. It is our sin nature. It is our desire to do things that are wrong. All right. We say that is sin. We Lutherans say that concupiscence is sin. The Roman Catholic Church says concupiscence is not sin. Right? That is something that we differ on. And they would equate it with the same way that Jesus was tempted but didn't sin, right? So they would say that same thing, just because you want to sin doesn't make you a sinner. We say, kind of like the Alcoholics Anonymous people, right? Like, I'm an alcoholic. I'm a sinner. I want to do bad things. I shouldn't want to do bad things, but I want to do bad things, right? So that is concupiscence. And it is sin. We would tie it in with our sinful nature. So keeping that idea with coveting, right? It's that desire to have what someone else has. We'll go a little bit into the 9th and 10th commandments here. Okay, I'm going to start with 295. I really need a bigger table. That's what I need. Is oh, let's go back to that. Oh, yeah. Oh, see, this is what happens. I put the book away and now I'm passing things. Okay, so go to page 66 in your textbooks. Shoot, we will go back to 61 to 65 next week. I picked the wrong vein to go down, but now I'm down it. So I gotta get this thought out. Okay, so I'm going to read from the Large Catechism, paragraph 295, which is right before what we have written here. Further, every man had power over his wife to put her away publicly by giving her a bill of divorce and to take another. This is Old Testament times. Therefore, they were in constant danger among each other. If one took a fancy to another's wife, he might declare any reason both to dismiss his own wife and to estrange his neighbor's wife from him, so that he might get her in a way that appeared right. That was not considered a sin or a disgrace among them, just as it is hardly considered a sin now with hired help, when an owner dismisses his manservant or maidservant, or takes another's servant from him in any way. It's kind of a weird place to jump in, but that's kind of where it starts in the large catechism here. Because you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, manservant, maidservant, ox, donkey, anything that belongs to your neighbor. So the original hearers, they could just issue this bill of divorce, right? And then, so, somebody else is married to a woman I like more, I divorce mine, and then I go to him and I'm like, your wife's put on a few pounds. Have you noticed? Guys have been talking. And that blonde lady who moved into the tent next door to yours, she's looking, I've seen her looking over at you, right? I bet you if you divorced your wife, you can marry that one. So he divorces his, and then I'm like, oh, did I mention I like women that have 5 or 10 pounds extra? Would you like to marry me, right? Coveting, right? That desire to have what someone else has. Now, in that sort of silly example, was it legal? Yeah, it was totally legal. Presumably, would anyone think bad, or would they think that it was, hey, it's a legal transaction, right? He issued the certificate of divorce. What more do you want, right? It's all above board. It is unethical. It is unethical. Is it above board? No, it is not. Fortunately, now that we are in the New Testament era, we have very different rules, and you cannot just divorce your wife or divorce your husband for no reason whatsoever. That is a good thing. Remember how we talked last week or week before about security in marriage, right? Well, if I could just write a letter and stamp it and be divorced, that's not very secure, right? Okay, I think I'm trying. I shouldn't have gone down this road, but we did. So I gotta finish the thought here. Is anyone a big C.S. Lewis reader? No, have you read the Space Trilogy? Okay, so a lot of people don't even realize that C.S. Lewis wrote a space trilogy. It's 3 books. The first one is called Out of the Silent Planet. Second one is Paralandria, and the third one is called That Hideous Strength. They get weirder and weirder. C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien were good friends, and you can tell the influence that the Lord of the Rings guy had on C.S. Lewis, because his books got longer and longer and more science fiction-y as they went. But what those books are about is basically recreating the Garden of Eden, and the main character is involved sort of on the side of good, the good angel, if you will, and then there's the demon character, and they are both trying to encourage the main characters to either do good and obey the god of this planet, Venus, or to do bad, right? To give in to your sinful desires. And then, yes. That is absolutely the concept. That is absolutely the concept, because you have this lady who is, they're on floating islands, right? And she's not allowed to go to this other island. And so the bad guy who is consumed by the devil looks like a man, but he's like, you're being oppressed, you're being held back, you need to just go to this island, this one's gonna go down, you're gonna drown if you listen to this guy. And the good character is like, hey, the God of this place has set it up for you, and if you just trust him, your husband is coming, and he will be here for you if you just wait. Obey what you've been told, do the right thing, and the good will happen. So it's this back and forth. I bring up the series because in the third book, That Hideous Strength, it's a weird book, I told you. The good guys are trying to stop the bad guys from resurrecting Merlin the wizard. Okay, they resurrect Merlin the wizard, and it turns out Merlin the wizard is a good guy. But what's so interesting about the book, and the reason why, if you read it, the one thing that you would appreciate from it is things were different back then. And so we're talking about the 10 commandments, and it was legal to have a certificate of divorce. And then it's like, man, did God change his mind? Right? Because we can't do that anymore. Right? That's a hard one. So what I want you to think about is when you go camping, all right, do you eat at the table the same way that you eat at the table when you go to grandma's house? No, right? If you were to compare the two, you would say, when I go camping, I'm eating like a barbarian, right? I am washing my hands in a river and wiping them on my pants. I am sitting around a fire, right? If you're someone who drinks alcohol and you're an adult, you probably drink enough that you can't drive, and it doesn't matter because you're just going to go to your tent, right? You go to grandma's house, you wash your hands in the hose outside and you wipe them on the curtains, right? You take her dishes and you throw them in the fireplace so you don't have to clean up. You drink so much that you can't drive. Hopefully grandma's going to smack you and be like, what are you doing? Right? Well, you don't have a car when you camp, right? So it doesn't matter as much. You don't have a table. You don't have a house. You're on dirt, right? So things are different. And God reveals more and more things as humanity developed. It's not he's changing his mind. It's that God recognizes that things are different, that he's giving more to us. As we get closer and closer to Jesus, the picture gets more and more clear, right? Because if you think about rules and things that we need today, like not drinking and driving, as an aside, has anybody ever PBT'd themselves? You know, because I had one when I was a cop, and we would play with it all the time. And it was amazing how often somebody would be like, oh, I'm wasted. And then they'd blow into it and be like a 0.03. And you're like, I'm not apparently wasted, but I'm still not going to drive. And then other times people would be like, I'm fine. And they'd blow a 0.1 or 0.15. And it's like, oh my goodness, I could still drive, right? Superimpose that to your campsite, right? If you're just going to go sleep in your hammock, it doesn't really matter, right? So certain things are much more important as society and humanity develop than they are when the people of Israel were living in tents, herding sheep, right? They didn't have, I don't know, maybe they had cups, wooden cups, I guess. But do you see my point? How we started out in a much more primitive time. We get closer and closer to Jesus. We get more and more clear picture. We get more and more instructions. Things make sense. It's just different. It's an exposition of what was already there. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. An exposition of what was already there. Does anybody have a question about that or a comment about that?
Well, I just believe that God never changes
Absolutely.
and that he reveals to us what we need to know in his time. Yes.
So she said that God never changes and he reveals to us what we need to know in his time. And that's I agree 100%. And in my sort of poor analogy of camping and drinking as compared to driving and drinking, hopefully that communicates that, you know, it's not that if you're camping, it's a great idea to get super drunk, right? Because it's not, it never is. But the consequences are different. The situation is different. And so as you emerge from your campsite 3 days later, smelling of bad things and, you know, unshaven and carrying everything on your back, and you go back to society, you live by a more developed set of rules, right? Make sense? So just something to chew on. It's something that when I read that book series, that was honestly the only reason I kept reading it, is because I really liked how it expounded on the difference of mankind going through. Hopefully that wasn't too much of a rabbit trail. Any questions? We're 7:15. So anybody have any questions about anything other than C.S. Lewis?
So we're doing 9 and 10, did you say?
Yes, ma'am. We will continue with 9 and 10 next week. I will not be here Sunday, so I will try my best to get Clarion emailed for St. Paul, and I'll email you, I guess, with the what you call it, Congregation at Prayer. All righty, guys. Well, let's close with the Lord's Prayer then. Lord, remember us in your kingdom and teach us to pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.